All right, so welcome to week 5, and this is our final week of our study. There's probably enough stuff here really to do a whole other week, but we're not going to bother with that next week with Thanksgiving and all. But this is week 5. We are going to be covering a lot of different things. So we're going to be covering Philadelphia. We're going to be covering Laodicea, which are the last two churches there of the 7 letters. But Laodicea is kind of an enlarged one because it's hard to talk about it without talking about some other cities. And so I'm saying that here up front because we're going to go fast today because we want to be able to fit this within that sort of hour 15 like we've been keeping it to. So the good thing about that is Philadelphia is tiny, and there's not necessarily a lot to Philadelphia. So here's like a video overview, like I did last week from Google Maps, that just shows you a little bit about the area where Philadelphia is. It is on a main roadway. That roadway we talked about last week, it's that royal road that went all the way from Sardis all the way to Persia. It went through Tarshish, which is that area where the Apostle Paul is from. It's a major roadway. And so Philadelphia itself was founded in the 2nd century BC by Attalus II. And it is not as old or as important as any of the other cities. It's probably either the smallest, or at least maybe there's more people there, but it is the least important of all of them. And the reason is because it is newer. It was just 2nd century BC, whereas we're talking, some of these older ones like Ephesus and places like that are 7th, 8th, 9th century, even as far back as 13th century BC. And it was founded as a military colony. And the intent here is, if you want to think about this, on a road, we talked about at the very beginning of the study that there's a limited distance one could travel in a day. You're either traveling by cart or by horse or by foot. And so if you are a merchant that is traveling from Sardis, an important city to do trade in, beyond that all the way to Pergamon or heading back the other way, it's very important for you to have access to protection. And so it makes sense that you would put a military outpost along this road. And so if we're thinking about this in terms of Sardis, the distance of Philadelphia from Sardis is about 30 miles. So that's probably beyond what someone's going to walk in a day, because that's an enormous distance. But it does make sense that it just gets dropped there as a way of keeping safety on there. Now, it's in the middle of a valley, just like Sardis. It's the same valley. It's just further up that valley. And like we talked about, this is volcanic soil. We've talked about all these earthquakes and volcanoes that have been happening. And because of that, this large, wide valley is this just incredibly fertile land. I've said before that they produce more grapes there than is produced in Napa Valley. So it's incredibly fertile land even to this day. If you just go, everywhere you see is grapes. It's amazing. And then you'll see people actually sun drying the grapes out on large tarps if they're making raisins. It's a really unique and beautiful place. In Philadelphia, the chief deity was Dionysus. You remember Dionysus is the god of the party, the god of the theater, god of wine, which makes sense. If you're growing a lot of wine and grape there, it makes sense that your chief deity is the god of that. It was affected by that same earthquake that wrecked Sardis in 17 AD. Remember Sardis, the city up on the hill that fell down, destroyed, and killed tons of people. That same earthquake, just 30 miles up the road, wrecked Philadelphia as well. But Philadelphia wasn't necessarily as high up. But we do have this interesting little bit of tidbit is, I don't know if it was because they weren't able to be rebuilt as quickly, or it was fear of earthquake, but we do have record that after this earthquake in 17 AD, many people just began living outdoors. Lived outdoors for years following that earthquake in 17. So it's probably a combination of it's not as wealthy of a city, so it didn't rebuild as quickly, probably a little bit shy of these columns and doors and everything falling down from an earthquake, so many people lived outdoors for years. So during this time, that sort of area, that time around 17 AD and beyond, specifically past 17 AD, if you remember, the Roman Emperor Tiberius gave a bunch of aid to that area. So in the case of Sardis, and a lot of these other areas, just basically said, you're exempt from taxes for 5 years, and actually sent aid to support them. And so because of this, Philadelphia actually changed its name for a period of time, or wanted to be called Neo Caesarea, which is just, New Caesarea, the city of Caesar, as a way to honor Emperor Tiberius. Well, wouldn't you know it, but 6 years later in 23 AD, another earthquake happens and wrecks the city again. And a little bit later, from that time on, around the rule of Vespasian, which is sort of in the 60s and 70s, the city underwent another name change. They thought, we will curry favor with Emperor Vespasian. We will change our city name to be named after his wife. So the city was known as Flavia. So in 70 AD, what happens? Another earthquake. And then in 96 AD, finally, it reverts back to that original name, Philadelphia, that we have now borrowed for one of our major cities. And so it is the newest of the 7 cities. It was founded by Attalus II. And the nature of the city goes like this. So it was founded by Attalus II, and the Romans were trying to turn Attalus against his brother Eumenes II, but Attalus remained loyal. And so Attalus earned the nickname Philadelphus, which just means brotherly love, because Attalus remained loyal to his brother Eumenes II against the pressures of Rome. And so the city ended up sort of adopting that moniker for Attalus, since it was founded by Attalus. That's the name of it. So to call it the city of brotherly love is correct, but city is not actually in the name anywhere. The name just means brotherly love. If we were going to apply some Greek to it, it would be Philadelphia Police, Philadelphiaopolis, or something like that. But it's Philadelphia just simply means brotherly love, and it's because Attalus II, the king of Pergamum, refused to turn against his brother despite the pressures of Rome. It was a city because it was newer, didn't have a lot of religious traditions, didn't have that imperial court, that imperial cult we have talked about. It didn't actually get one of these until 214 AD. And so really what we're talking about, the time of the letter here, there was no cult to the emperor there. So there wasn't statues to Augustus, or a whole temple to Augustus, or to Julius Caesar. The letter, as you will see in a bit, does make reference to a synagogue, but we've not actually found the synagogue yet. There was some evidence that they found about 10 miles away, but that's not exactly within the city. And the other thing you need to understand about Philadelphia is that's it. That's all of it. There's really not much of it. It's all basically covered over by a modern city, a small city, but a modern city. And what you see here is actually not even 1st century. This is 6th century. This is a Byzantine church. I think it's called St. John's Church that is there. And it's the total footprint of it is smaller than the sanctuary. I mean, it's probably cut the sanctuary in half, and that's the total footprint of what's left. On the outside of town, there is some evidence that some homes took some of the walls of the city and sort of incorporated into their home. They think there may be some evidence of a stadium out there, but because it wasn't a significant city, because there was nothing terribly famous that had happened there, there's not been a lot of pressure, and because you just build over it, you're not going to tear down a giant apartment building in order just to dig up something. So this is what we got. And so we're just going to jump right into the letter on this one. There's a couple textual things we'll point out in the letter, and if you're joining us online, you can download the presentation in a PDF format, so you can look at it on your computer next to the screen, or you can print it out, whatever is comfortable to you. And so here it is. Let's read. And to the angel of the church of Philadelphia write, these are the words of the Holy One, the true One, who has the key of David, who opens and no one will shut, who shuts and no one opens. I know your works. Look, I've set before you an open door that no one is able to shut. I know that you have but little power, Yet you have kept my word and have not denied my name. I will make those of the synagogue of Satan who say that they are Jews but are lying. I will make them come and bow down before your feet, and they will learn that I have loved you because you have kept my word of endurance. I will keep you from the hour of trial that is coming on the whole world to test the inhabitants of the earth. I'm coming soon. Hold fast to what you have, so that no one takes away your crown. If you conquer, I will make you a pillar in the temple of my God. You will never go out of it. I will write on you the name of my God and the name of the city of God, the new Jerusalem that comes down from my God out of heaven, and my own new name. Let anyone who has an ear listen to the Spirit, listen to what the Spirit is saying to the churches. So I think if you would read this, if you would read all these letters in a row, and we're trying to sort of compare and contrast, this letter is strikingly similar to the letter to Smyrna, in that both have nothing but positive things to say, and they're both talking about a time of sort of trial and testing. Now, if you remember the one in Smyrna, it's a 10-day. It says you have a 10-day tribulation or trial coming up. This one's different. This is a whole world sort of thing. But also what makes it different is this isn't necessarily something that the church endures. This is that others endure. It tests the inhabitants of the world, what it's saying. Now, let's talk a little bit about that wording that happens there at the beginning. This is what's a little bit different about this letter. Is these are the words of the Holy One, the true One, who has the key of David, who opens and no one will shut, who shuts and no one will open. So, as you can see, the reason those are bracketed like that or formatted like that is to, if you're picking up your Bible, do your Bibles have that? Is it written a little different, or is it written as a paragraph? Okay. Is yours the same way, Jane? So it's not formatted like that. Okay, so some translations, and particularly the NOAB that I have, the New Oxford Annotated Bible, which is the NRSV, do format like this. And the reason is because these are allusions and outright quotations from Scripture. These are taken from the Hebrew Bible, and specifically probably the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, the Septuagint. And so these are references here from Isaiah. The key to the house of David comes from Isaiah 22. And this is different. This is not the way they're talking about Jesus in the other letters. And I don't know the significance of that, but I think it is worth pointing out that they're drawing on Hebrew scripture in this. It is, yeah. Maybe it's to talk about authority. I don't really know, but there's probably an extra reason in there we just don't fully know, but it is different. So I think that's worth pointing out. Both this church and Smyrna seem to be experiencing problems with their Jewish communities. So let's talk about that again. That's a running theme in this, and I want to be really clear: this is not a condemnation against all Jews, especially in this day of the rise of anti-Semitism again. That is not the intent of this. A synagogue of Satan is not a reference to all Jews. It is a specific locale, a local sect of Jews. And what it has to do is the reality that Jews had a special dispensation from Rome, that they were not required to worship the emperor. All other groups, all other religions still had to worship the emperor as God, but for some reason, Jews did not. They had this special status. And because of that, they were not as persecuted for not doing that, because they were allowed to do that, special status. And so often what we think a synagogue of Satan is that as Christians started to rise up within that local synagogue, becoming a small subset within that synagogue, and started adding Gentiles, it would have been very understandable for Jews to be able to say, these people are not one of us, and therefore these Christians do not deserve the same protections. And so Jews, while they might not have been active persecutors, they open the door to persecution in these settings. They might have turned people in, or, in its most malignant, might have turned people in to actually point them and say, go get these people. And maybe it's most innocent, they just simply said, they're not one of us. And so that's what that reference to synagogue of Satan is here. So Christ promises them 2 rewards if they conquer. Remember, conquer is that language, it's apocalyptic language that's referenced to enduring in this apocalyptic age. Enduring, keeping one's faith in difficult times is what it means to conquer. And the promises are that they will be pillars in the temple of God. So a pillar is a metaphor of a place of honor, a place of security and presence. And I think it's fair for us to see that this is just important metaphorical language, but I think knowing what has happened here in Philadelphia with these earthquakes and people living outdoors, the idea of being made into a strong pillar, because it says where you won't have to go out. So I think it's probably a pretty clear allusion to some of what has happened in the city, the promise of stability, of strength, the place of honor. If you conquer, you will have this pillar. And then there's this idea, the second promise is that you will have special names inscribed on them. So Christ declares that their names will be written on pillars, the name of God, the name of God's city, and Christ's new name. Inscriptions on pillars in ancient temples were a common way of indicating to whom this temple was dedicated or who was being honored in the pillar. So here, bearing the name of God in God's city indicates that God owns this temple. And that they're writing their names on that means that they will be God's people, God's own possession. And so this is, I don't know, this is the idea that these are a secret name or a special name. I don't really quite know what to make of that. I think we try to say that this is an allusion to the mysteries of God yet to be revealed. There's a lot of different other religions that talk about secret and knowing a secret name. To know someone's secret name is to have power over them, but I don't think that's what's going on here. It says, I think it's a special name. Yeah. Let me see, where are we at? I will write on you the name of my God and the name of the city of my God, the new Jerusalem that comes down from God of heaven, my own name. I think there's an implication there. Yeah. 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 I don't know what to say about this one much. I mean, we don't know about this one a lot. And the language is a little different. And the fact that it's all praise, I don't know what can be taken out of that other than these are people that are faithful in sort of like not really an important town that are enduring persecution. I don't really know what else to say about Philadelphia. Honestly, on our trip, this was sort of the weakest leg of everything we got there, and the leader was very much like that. It was like, well, this is Philadelphia, and then it started raining. So I think in my picture there on the right, you can see it's starting to rain, and we're about to run off. So we actually had to walk like blocks just to get there because it was just, I mean, it's just literally in the middle of the city. It's just apartments all around it and tarps, and yeah, it's wasn't terribly impressive. So let's move on and let's talk about Laodicea, which is where we're going to spend the bulk of our time. It's located on the Lycus River Valley, which is the valley over from Philadelphia. It's about 40 miles southeast of Philadelphia. You have to go over a ridge, but it drops into another valley, the Lycus River Valley. If you remember, the churches are sort of like an inverted V. So if Ephesus is here, if you go 100 miles to the east, that's when you're going to end up in Laodicea. But before we get to Laodicea, we cannot talk about Laodicea without having to talk about 2 neighboring cities. So that's why Laodicea is a bit of a long one. And so right here in the middle, this is the ruins, this is the tell of Laodicea right here in the middle of the valley. Here in a second, you're going to see a video zoom around. It's going to show you a bit of the valley. And eventually at the end, you're going to be able to look across the valley. And I want you to look for some signs of white on the hill, and you'll notice it. There it is. Do you see it? You see it appearing right there, the white? That is the city of Hierapolis, and that is the city we're going to be talking about now. It is located about 6 miles away from Laodicea. And so let's talk about it. Hierapolis. The name just literally means sacred or holy city. It was founded in the 3rd century BC by the Seleucids as a Greek city, and so it's going to have all those Greek elements like the main Cardo road and the agora and the theater and all those things. After the Treaty of Apamea, it was given to the Attalids, but you remember Attalus II, we've talked about this over and over, in 133 BC just decided to give all of his stuff to Rome. And so it became a Roman colony. It's noted as a textile industry. Hierapolis is one of the 3 churches that are located in this Lycus River Valley. So we have Laodicea, we have Hierapolis, and then we'll have another one we're going to get to here in a second. In terms of it as an archaeological site, it has one of the largest necropolises in the ancient world. Over 1,200 tombs have been found. And as you can see, these are significant tombs. Some of them are, in fact, buildings you can walk in. But if you've ever seen these sort of ancient sarcophagi, they're really the size of this communion table over here with a giant lid on them made of stone, often decorated incredibly ornately. And so when we say there's 1,200 tombs been found, it's important to understand that the only people who gets tombs like this are the families of the rich and the famous. This is the way you preserve their memory and show their status as they pass on. And so poor people are not buried in such extravagant ways. So it's important to understand that. The agora itself is one of the largest. It's just a beautiful sunset as we were arriving in there. The agora, the marketplace, was one of the largest marketplaces in the ancient world. It was 588 feet by 919 feet. Massive. Massive. The theater, here's just some of the other sites. I think this is the Domitian Gate as you go in. This is one of the main roads. This is the east to west road running into the city. This right here is an image kind of up above the Cardo. So the Cardo would have been down below there. Let's see. Up here on a hill that you can see some ruins there. This is what is known as the Martyrium of Philip. It's on a hill up above the city, and it was built in the 5th century AD to honor Philip. But there's a little bit of confusion in church history because Eusebius and some others, early church historians, got a little confused. Was it Philip the Apostle or was it Philip the Evangelist? Remember, those are 2 different people. So the Philip that visits the Ethiopian eunuch is Philip the deacon, or Philip the Evangelist is what they're called. But then there's Philip the Apostle. Most people think, and scholars tend to agree, that the earlier tradition is that it's Philip the Apostle and that Eusebius just got a little confused later. And so most people tend to think this is about Philip the Apostle. And tradition says that he eventually moved to Hierapolis, where he was ultimately crucified upside down when I believe he was around 70. He had some daughters with him. This is the other part of the confusion. It talks about his daughters are a major part of the story of the Philip of Hierapolis. And so both Philip the Apostle had daughters and Philip the Evangelist had daughters, 4 daughters to be exact. So that's a little confusing as well. But this martyrium was built here in the 5th century AD to honor Philip the Apostle. It's not a church. It's a place that has like rooms off to the side. It would have been a beautiful sort of round or octagonal shape. And it's a place that people would have taken pilgrimages to. So it was a very popular pilgrimage site for years and years and years. And this is actually this kind of a distorted image because this is one of those like 360 shots, but this is from the inside of it. So you can kind of see the interesting shape of it. It would have been a very impressive building up on this hill. It would have been a place people traveled for hundreds of miles to travel there as a pilgrimage journey to honor Philip and to remember his sacrifice. The church was built around a tomb. There's a church actually below, and this has recently just started being excavated. So if you've actually been, if you follow any sort of biblical archaeology, you would realize that this church that you're seeing here, specifically on the picture on the right, has only been excavated within the last 2 years. People knew it was there, but to actually see the footprint of it is only really in the last 2 years. And right there, you can kind of see, you can't really see it in the image on the right, but off on the left, kind of obscured by that tall section, is this building right here on the left, which is a tomb that the church was built around, which many people say is the tomb of Philip the Apostle. Now, a tomb like this would have been a wealthy person's tomb, but if you think about the story of Jesus, Jesus was not buried in his family tomb. He was buried in the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea. It's entirely possible, and I think probable, that a wealthy person of the city would have donated this tomb to honor him, but it also would have been, to be fair, to honor the person that had his Philip buried in his family tomb. That's been an argument about Joseph of Arimathea for years, that it would have been an honor to have a rabbi buried in your tomb. So, yeah, this martyrium, it's really neat. It doesn't have any significance to the story, but it's one of those things that's neat to know. There's sort of an image of far away. That's the martyrium right there at the top of the image. Here's the theater. It is one of the best preserved theaters in Turkey. It has a capacity of about 10 to 12,000. And they actually believe they have the materials for the whole second level of the theater. So that back area right there, there's actually 2 levels to that. And so they're going to start assembling the second level again here soon, which is pretty amazing. It is an impressive theater. This is a sort of wider image of it. To give you a sense of its height and scale, there's an image of it from sort of down below. On the right is another recently excavated places. It's one of the 2 places, at least that I know of in the ancient world, that claim to have gates to Hades available in them. So Caesarea Philippi was the one. I've actually preached on this a couple months ago. Caesarea Philippi, behind the altar to Pan, and it's a place where Jesus actually spoke to the apostles and said, the gates of Hades will not overcome you. Well, he was literally standing in front of what the ancient world viewed as the gates of Hades. And what these are in both cases are a place where a river emerges from the ground, and because it is a ground-based spring, it often comes with toxic chemicals. And so where on the image on the right, I'm actually standing over the entrance to the gates of Hades. And so why it got known as that is because birds would fly in that little cave below, but never fly out, because they would go in and die of asphyxiation because of the gases that were emitted. They would do sacrifices there, because that in the background is the temple to Apollo. So sacrifices were done here, where they would take a bull and the priest would lead it into there and tie it in there, and then it would die because it would be killed by the gases. And so that's how that was known. And the belief was, I guess, if you could climb down far enough, you would end up in Hades. So you're looking at one of the gates to Hades, which is really, really interesting. But by far, the thing that this area is most known for, that Hierapolis is most known for, both now and the ancient world, is this. And it's the thing that you were able to see on the video off in the far distance there, the white things. These are called the white, I'm going to do a terrible job pronouncing, white calcareous travertine. So travertine is a type of stone, often consistent of lime. We can still use it for flooring and stuff. It's the most notable thing about Hierapolis, because the hot springs that came out of the ground there fed and came down to this ever-growing series of pools that traced all the way down the hill. And this is the reverse view. So this is looking out towards Laodicea. In this image, you can see the different little pools. I mean, it looks like salt, but it's not salt. And you can walk on it today, and you can, yeah, it's hard. It can be, there's algae that can grow on sections that can be really slippery, but by and large, it's just hard, and it's not fun to walk on. It's kind of sharp. But you got to take your shoes off, and you can walk down it, and you and thousands of other people. You can rent angel wings, black or white angel wings, and you can go stand and get your Instagram pictures, because every influencer in Turkey is there trying to get their pictures with this place. It's a really neat place, but it's kind of neat. It's like, wow, this is wild looking, but in my opinion, I don't think it's very nice looking. It just kind of looks like a mess. But it's, yeah, Yeah, and so the water just sort of trickles out, and because of the mineral deposits in it, just deposits there and creates this. This is sort of the main section there. There's a couple other sections to it that aren't as touristy, but that pop out of the side of the mountain. And so the Turkish name for this area is Pamukkale or Pamukkale, and it's just the Turkish word that means cotton castle. So this is because it's elevated up on a hill and kind of looks like a cotton castle, I guess. There's an area a little further back from it that actually has the actual geothermal sort of pools you can swim in, and they have like little, diners and stuff built around it. We didn't swim in it, but it's there, but it eventually seeps out and forms these travertines out front. So that is what Hierapolis is well known for, these hot waters that are creating this. It would have been a place that people traveled to because those waters, those mineral waters, much like places like French Lick, Indiana, and other places that have hot springs, would have been viewed as therapeutic. You go there and you heal your ails. And so if you were a wealthy person or someone that just in need of healing, you would travel there. So we have Hierapolis that's like that. And if you remember all the way back to, we had the Asclepian in Pergamum was another place of healing. So these are sort of main places of healing in the ancient world. One, Pergamum was more medical. This is more just come and be rejuvenated by the hot mineral baths. So that is what Hierapolis is most well known for. Hierapolis is important because there's three churches. There's Hierapolis, Laodicea, and Colossae. And all of those are referenced in specifically the book of Colossians. So let's talk about Colossae. So next here, this is Laodicea. Off to the right, you'll see it as it spins real quick as Hierapolis, but it'll ultimately spin a little more. There goes Hierapolis. And then it's going to go a little further up the valley. And that little mound right there is Colossae. That's it. That is Colossae. There it is, folks. Colossae. It's about 10 to 12 miles up the river, the Lycus River Valley. It is in the foothills of Mount Cadmus. There's an image from the top of that tell. A tell is just a covered over dirt mound that we call an unexcavated city, because as cities are destroyed, they just push dirt over them and build on top. Kind of like what happened with Chicago. Chicago burnt, so they flattened it all and built on top of it. Same thing happens with ancient cities, and so they're kind of like layer cakes, and over time they build up into these mounds that we call tells. And so all Colossae is just this tell. There's some evidence of some places around it. We know it was a decent-sized city. It was really a world-class city until Laodicea was formed, and then sort of as Laodicea gained in importance, Colossae regressed in importance. What's really exciting is the Austrians that were doing work in Hierapolis have finished the work over there, and they've actually come over to Colossae. And then the next section down, kind of off to the left over here, is an area where they actually had the grid marked out to begin the excavating, like within days of us being there, which is exciting. Because we have a letter to Colossians, we actually have a letter to Colossians, but we also have other references. Philemon, the book of Philemon was written to a man named Philemon who lived in Colossae. So it is a significant place, biblically speaking. And so the way they excavate is they put out a series of rope. I think they're 8x8 sections, something like that, square, and then they just go straight down in a square. Everything they find, they catalog. They clean. It's painstakingly slow. This came from square A1, and they catalog it. And so it takes a while to do it, but it allows them to really keep good track of what they find and keep it well preserved. And so Colossae is one of those places, probably over the next decade, it's going to be pretty exciting how much it changes and how much we learn about specifically Colossae itself. It's in the foothills of Mount Cadmus. That's this range right here. The highest peak there in the middle, Mount Cadmus, is about 8,000 feet. It is high enough and up enough that it's snow covered for a good portion of the year. Obviously not snow covered here. I was here in August, but you get it a little further on because it was actually cold when we were there. It's going to be a snow covered peak through late fall, even into the spring a little bit, and then it starts melting and obviously that snow melt provides a lot of water for the beautiful area around there. It's a very pretty area, I'll say. Ancient historians speak of Colossae as being a great city. King Xerxes of Persia visited there in 481 BC, and Cyrus the Younger in 401 BC. Both passed through the city. It's famous for its wool, purple dyed wool. Laodicea, which was formed in the 3rd century BC, as it was founded and started to gain in power because of its location, Colossae started to recede. But outside of that, as far as the site goes, there's not much to tell. This is it. We have some other context clues. I think it is important to understand the letter to Colossians, even though it was written to Colossians, most people believe it was actually a sermon that was essentially just written down. So it was meant to be read all at once in bulk. And it was what was considered an itinerant letter. So this letter, although addressed to Colossae, would have gone to Hierapolis and Laodicea and be read there and just as significant there as well. So I think that's an interesting thing. Here's an overview. This is an image, so if you've downloaded the pack, you get a good view of it. This gives you a better perspective of where these are to one another. When you're at Laodicea, you can easily see Hierapolis, but you can't see Colossae because of the way the river twists a little bit, and because Colossae is kind of behind a couple little hills. But when you're in Colossae, you can see all the way to Hierapolis. It's pretty impressive. And so these are all well-known places to each other. So let's talk specifically now about Laodicea. 10 miles to Colossae, 6 miles to Hierapolis. If you're kind of standing, you look that way is Colossae, and if you stand looking that way is Hierapolis. It's on the south side of the Lycus River Valley, and it falls between 2 streams. There's a stream called the Asopus, which is to the northwest, and a stream called the Capris, which is to the southeast. The Lycus River also runs right next to it, which ultimately, a couple miles south of the city, joins with the Meander River. It's just, these are all important areas right there. It's one of the 5 cities founded by the Seleucid ruler Antiochus II. Zeus is considered the main deity of Laodicea, which is interesting. If you remember, most of these cities, your main god has been Artemis, but Zeus is the main deity here in Laodicea. And it's a major junction point between multiple highways. That big main highway that ran east to west, that went all the way from Sardis to Persia, ran right here, but also some other highways. And because of that, it was a thriving business center because multiple roads converged there. And like other cities of the region, it was handed over. It was Attalid ruled after the Treaty of Apamea, but then Attalus II decided, here you go, Rome, take all this. And then ultimately, that's when it fell to Roman rule. It was known in the region as a royal city, not because itself had a king, but because one of its citizens, Polemon I, who was the son of a wealthy rhetorician, Zeno, became the king of Cilicia in 39 BC, of Pontus in 37, and Lesser Armenia in 30 BC. So Zeno was a famous sort of rhetorician there in the city. He had a son named Polemon I, who eventually became a king of multiple regions. And so people would have had this enormous pride of saying, we're the city that gave birth to a king. Which would have been a major part of its identity. And his family, and the reason part of this was significant is because his family ruled large portions of Asia Minor for the better part of almost a decade. So it would have been a significant dynasty. And so like all other cities in that region, when the earthquakes hit, Laodicea was harmed and destroyed. But in 60 AD, this gives you a clue about its wealth. In 60 AD, it was the only city in all of Asia that said to Rome, you don't need to give us aid. We're good. They're that wealthy. They were that wealthy, they were able to fund their own recovery because of their significant wealth. So it was known for sheep that produced a black wool that was used in the main garment that a lot of people wore. I can't remember the name of it. There's a specific name for this type of outer garment that people wore that often had a covering over the head, but it was a cloak. And they were the ones that produced the best wool for that, this dark black wool. It was famous for a medical school that produced this famous ancient ophthalmologist named Demosthenes Pilates. And he created this ancient eye medicine called Phrygian powder, and it was made there in Laodicea because the waters there contained a lot of zinc and alum, and those were common active ingredients in this eye salve. And so that was an important thing. If you thought of Laodicea, you thought, oh, this is the place where that famous eye medicine came from, where this famous doctor is, where they had this famous medical school, which is really interesting. It was because it was known for business and things like that. It was a strong banking center where they minted coins, and a lot of people did money changing there. That's another significant part of the city. And because of all those things, it was an incredibly wealthy city, incredibly wealthy, royal, wealthy, medical school, banking, major clothing. All of these things you would have thought of Laodicea, an incredibly important city. The Jewish community settled there in 240 BC, and somebody estimated, we have some records, that around the time of 62 BC, there were around 7,500 Jews there, so a pretty significant population in a decent-sized city. So under the city is I'm going to go all the way back to you have to give me a second. I'm going to go all the way back to one of my first slides here. This image that you see right here in the middle, on the very first slide, so those at home, it's the very first slide. You see that there's a pillar that you can see a cross and a menorah on it. So that was found there when they were excavating some of the areas. I think most people believe the menorah was there first. It also, below it, is a ram's horn, a citron, and a palm branch, but Christians later tried to incorporate a cross into that. It's significant to find that. There's a beautiful Byzantine basilica there. There's two theaters. There's a north theater and a south theater. There we go. The North Theater set 12,000 people. It's excavated in indecent shape. The West Theater set 8,000 people. It's just kind of stone sticking out of dirt right now. But what's neat about that, in that theater, you can kind of look out and it overlooks Hierapolis. There was a stadium there. We didn't go to that. It seats about 20 to 25,000 people. But it's important to know, because of all this wealth, it was an incredibly modern city. It was built on a grid, much like our major cities are. It had running water. You can actually, there's evidence of the clay pipes everywhere that's just running all over the city, and it had an active sewer system where there's actually some parts, if you're willing to pick up a rock, you can climb down in the sewer system of Laodicea. That's all along that main road. So that main road in the upper right image there, the sewage system just runs right down the middle of that below the road. So it's incredibly important city. The major water came from about 5 miles south from Baspinar. They had piping that ran in, like I said, those clay pots all the way for their ceramic pots. And the interesting about the pots is when you see them, and I think probably part of the reason there's so many still visible today is because they were constantly replacing them, because those pipes kept getting full of lime deposits because of the enormously high mineral content of the water there. That would have been true about a lot of water down there, but for some reason, it happened a lot in Laodicea. There's legend, and I haven't been able to confirm this, and in my reading, that a lot of times the water of Laodicea needed to be boiled because of that deposit, in order to purify the water, to get some of that out so it didn't make you sick in consuming it. But that's the main gist of Laodicea. But I think it helps you understand when we read here, because of all the letters, this might be the one that has the most striking imagery and references to it. And I think, in my opinion, it has one of the most often misinterpreted lines in Revelation. And so let's look at that, the message to Laodicea. And to the angel of the church of Laodicea write the words of the Amen, the Father, the faithful and the true witness, the origin of God's creation. I know your works. You are neither hot nor cold. I wish that you were either cold or hot. So because you are lukewarm and neither cold nor hot, I'm about to spit you out of my mouth. Now, that's a very generous translation. That word there just means throw up. I'm going to barf you up. For you say, I am rich, I have prospered, and I need nothing. You do not realize that you are wretched, pitiable, poor, blind, and naked. Therefore, I advise you to buy from me gold refined by fire, so that you may be rich, and white robes to clothe yourselves, and to keep the shame of your nakedness from being seen, and salve to anoint your eyes, so that you may see. I reprove and discipline those whom I love. Be earnest, therefore, and repent. Listen, I am standing at the door knocking. If you hear my voice and open the door, I will come in and eat with you, and you with me. To the one who conquers, I will give a place with me on my throne, just as I myself conquered and sat down with my Father on his throne. Let anyone who has an ear listen to what the Spirit is saying to the churches. What'd you catch? No praise, that's true. This is probably this might be the harshest letter, because the other ones where they're harsh, there comes a little bit of praise too, but this one has no praise. You're right. Yeah. Yeah, so you catch that. They're famous for the salve on the eyes, and yet they're the ones who need the salve. What else? Any other references you catched in there? You caught in there? We'll get to that. So let's break down probably the most famous line in all of this. And I'll say from the outset, there's no definitive way of understanding this. But I do think it is has been a misunderstood. So I'm not going to give to you the definitive interpretation, but I think, in my opinion, it is the best understanding of it. In verse 15, he says, I know your works. You're neither hot nor cold. I wish that you were either cold or hot, because you are lukewarm and neither cold nor hot, I am about to spit you out of my mouth. So think about what we just talked about the two cities that were within earshot, spitting distance from Laodicea. You look off to the left and you see Hierapolis, famous for hot, healing water. An incredibly important place people went to. They found use in its healing. That's there. And you look off to the right and you see Colossae at the foot of this mountain that was often covered by snow. And so as that water melts, cool, refreshing water runs down through the city, making this, honestly, that area kind of felt like Italy, kind of felt like a really lush portion of Italy with the tall, thin trees and just beautiful fields. It was just, refreshing in its own right, refreshing to drink, but refreshing for the plants and everything like that, because it was snow water as opposed to spring water. There was less of a mineral deposit in it. So this imagery, I think it's pretty obvious that the letter here is drawing upon what they would have known: hot water, cold water. Now, it's a question: how have you heard this translated? If you were to say to me, what does this mean? How have you interpreted this or had this relayed to you?
I think if you are kind of mediocre in your faith, that's unacceptable.
Yeah. So if you're mediocre in your faith, it's unacceptable. And I think that's the interpretation I feel like I was given growing up. And I think it's understandable, because within Christianity, particularly in the West, any Christianity that has been affected or come into contact with evangelicalism will bear some of this. We will talk about, I want to be on fire for God. And so there's this assumption in this that you need to be hot or cold, and the hot is the good, right? That to me, that was the assumption I had, because what it meant was to have a lukewarm faith meant to have a wishy-washy faith, that you were just making half efforts in faith. You weren't fully on fire for God, and you weren't fully against God. You were lukewarm in your faith. But think about the context of those cities and that water in this verse. In this letter, is Jesus saying the hot water is good and the cold water is bad? or the cold water is good and the hot water is bad? Or is he not making a judgment on which is good and which is bad? Because both in their settings are useful. So part of the imagery, what's going on here is Laodicea would have been a place that was surrounded on water that was being sourced from both locations. So the idea that the water being lukewarm would have been something that was quite literal there, as the hot water rolled down from Hierapolis and the cold water came down when it crossed streams there, as the Caster met the Meander, or the other streams met each other. Yes, the water would have become lukewarm. And so that metaphor is there. In my opinion, what is being said here is be useful. It's not about being on fire versus being hot for God versus cold for God instead of being lukewarm, because I think that can be used as a very dangerous interpretation to say that you have a lukewarm faith if you aren't on fire for God, or you don't have this ecstatic religious feeling.
I think that in the notes to my translation, it says their lukewarm Christianity is nauseating. So I think about now that we're coming to the season of preparing food and everything, they'll say serve cold food cold and hot food hot.
Yeah.
And so
that's a good metaphor. Serve cold food cold and hot food hot. Yeah.
Between, that's not the way to go, and that's sort of nauseating.
Yeah.
But both of those are useful. I mean, cold items are good, as well as hot items.
Yeah. And the reason I think this interpretation holds up is because you never interpret verses in isolation. And so this is a whole letter. So let's look on what Jesus is saying in the rest of the letter. So if Hierapolis makes use of its hot waters by being a place of healing, and Colossians uses its cool waters by being a place of washing and a place of refreshment, what does Laodicea have to use? So 17, verse 17, it goes on to say, and I'll go back and put that up. For you say, I am rich, I have prospered, and I need nothing. You do not realize that you are wretched, pitiable, poor, blind, and naked. So here we have most likely incredibly rich Christians living in an incredibly rich and wealthy city, and yet using that wealth as a way to not advance the faith in any way, to not use that to serve other people, to help heal other people, to help transport individuals out of difficult situations. No, instead that they use this and they just say to themselves, I'm rich, I'm prospered, and I need nothing. Life is great. Life is good. Life is good. But they don't use their abundance in order to serve others. So that's something. That's our hot or cold water that they have there that they're doing nothing with. And therefore I advise you to buy from me gold refined in fire. I think that's a clear reference to the banking industry that would have been Laodicea, because they would have been refining gold to make coins there, so that you may be rich. And white robes, remember what they're famous for? Dark robes. Famous robes there to clothe yourselves and to keep the shame of your nakedness from being seen, and salve to anoint your eyes so that you may see. Here he's going through in clear references to the things that the city is notable for, the resources they have, the things that make that city the city, and yet these Christians in Laodicea are content just to be rich, fat, and happy, to be lukewarm, to not be useful. I reprove and I discipline those whom I love. Be earnest, therefore, and repent. Listen, I am standing at the door and knocking. If you hear my voice, open the door. I will come in and eat with you, and you with me. To the one who conquers, I give a place to me on my throne. I think that right there not only is obvious revelation language, is probably also an allusion to the royal nature of the city and the pride they have in themselves of being a place where royalty comes from. Someone used the analogy once, it'd be like saying, what is it, where the Kennedys from, Kennebunkport, or, it'd be like saying, having pride that you were in the hometown of the Kennedys, or pick another, famous leader. That would be the pride that this city had. And so I think the interpretation of this is to lukewarmness is complacency with what one has. Complacency to say, I have enough, and yet I'm not going to make use of those things in order to advance the kingdom of God. So it's not about having a faith that's on fire versus cold. It's about being useful. Some of the most faithful people I have ever known in my life are people that work out their faith in a lot of fear and trembling, and it doesn't come across as like, I love Jesus, I'm super on fire. It comes across in a quiet faithfulness where they make use of their talents and their resources in order to help others. So this is not a letter telling you that the only way for you to be a faithful Christian is to be someone out there being, praise Jesus, y'all. It's more to say that God has given you, and this is very good Reformed theology, God has given you resources. How are you going to be a steward of those to help others? So I think that's a pretty interesting, I don't know, I find that quite striking, because you can stand there on top of the Western Theater and you can look and clear as day see Hierapolis, and you can look up and see the gap where Colossae is just behind, and understanding that in that place you would have thought of yourselves as this wealthy city and everything was great. They're not enduring persecution. They have their wealth. They have prominence among the other cities. They had everything, and they could sit back and just say, I'm fine, I need nothing. And yet be totally blind to the idea that they are not using those things to help others, and that Jesus says that they are the wretched, they are the pitiable, they are the poor, they are the blind and naked, and that all these things they had, they're the people in need. They're not the people that have enough. And I think that's pretty powerful. Any thoughts or questions on that?
It goes out a lot of context.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that whole lukewarm thing.
What
Yeah.
I think
You know that, you think of that. Because you say it's the common
Mm-hmm.
parlance,
Yeah.
what I mean? Well, I'm lukewarm on that idea.
Yeah.
Well, and when I think of the book of Revelation, those are the phrases.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
gonna spew you out of my mouth.
Yeah. And that, yeah, it's so helpful to realize that cold water has use, hot water has use. Stop just being in the middle. Be of use. Use what you have. Yeah. And that's, I think maybe of all the books or all the letters, this might be the one, this one or Pergamum might be the one most applicable to American Christians, because when I think of ourselves, we have to realize how wealthy the majority of us are, and how our society tells us to build a life that makes us content, and that contentment is based on how much money we have, how much money we can use to create a perceived sense of safety and protection, and how we can use our money to care for our eyes and our bodies and all these things. And we live in a society that distracts us enough that we don't realize the struggle other folks are in. And we are lukewarm to other suffering, or fail to use what we have on behalf of others, because we tend to emotionally spiritualize our perception of faith in a way that we're only faithful in as much as I'm really passionate for Jesus. But I think this is where having a more daily understanding of faith. I love my wife and my daughter, and I do lots of things every day in order to demonstrate my love for my wife and daughter. But when I do them, I don't take out the trash on Monday night with a deep sense of passion. You know what I mean? I don't mow the backyard with a deep sense, I am passionate about mowing this backyard. But we do these things because of our faithfulness and love to them. It's useful. And so I think if we begin to understand our faith, like, look, I love that. Everybody loves that mountaintop feeling when they have it, but that's not the entirety of faith. We are deeply dedicated to things, and we set up our life and organize our life to try to marshal our resources and intentions to serve that. And that's not always sexy or passionate, but we do the little things in order to do that. And I think that's where some of this comes in. It's like, what are the little things you do in your life that orient yourself to serving God in this way, as opposed to just sitting back and saying, I have what I need and I'm really passionate about God. That's where I think I think that what we learned after Mother Teresa's death in some of her personal writings are some of the more interesting things you'll ever learn, to realize that she is someone that she considered herself to be in the dark night of the soul for many decades towards the end of her life. The dark night of the soul is where you are doing things for God, you are serving God and engaging in spiritual practices, but you don't necessarily get the benefit of that. You don't necessarily feel great about it, but you do it because you care. And this St. John of the Cross is the person who came up with this idea. It's an interesting concept, but we look at the life of Mother Teresa and you look at her and say, clearly she has oriented her life in Calcutta around serving God in this specific way. And by all accounts, we would look at it and say she is passionate about that. But when you read her internal dialogue about what she's experiencing, it was more a matter of day to day, this is the small step of faithfulness I take. It's not about waking up every day with this enormous sense of passion and great mood, and we just go out and do it. No, it's about, I love God, I care about these things, and so these are the little things I'm going to do. And I think that, to me, that's good news, because I think the other is emotional manipulation. It's trying to manipulate yourself into an emotional status to be able to say, well, now I'm faithful because I've worked myself up to this. Whereas if I love something, if I care about something or someone, I do the small, little, unglamorous things in moment by moment in order to express that affection and love. And I think that's probably a better model for faithfulness, and stewardship as a follower of Jesus, especially as a rich, white, privileged man in the United States of America. So, any other thoughts, Laodicea or Revelation as a whole? Any other questions on the whole of Revelation? Maybe just the letters. I'm not no expert on the entire book. Questions, comments, other theological insights?